Well, speaking of the SIU, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, that's NSFAS, has welcomed findings by the Special Investigating Unit. The SIU has revealed that over 5 billion rand was paid to unqualifying students in the last 4 years. We're talking around 40,000 students at various institutions across the country. But how did we arrive at this point? Well, we are finding out now in just a moment. Clearly, there are too many loopholes in the system. Only students whose annual household income is under 350,000 rand may qualify to receive funding. Let's now speak to the NSFAS board chairperson, Ernest Khoza, who joins us in studio. Mr. Khoza, thank you very much for your time here on ENCA. Just tell us, how do we find ourselves at this point?
Morning, Lisiho and the viewers. We welcome the findings, the preliminary findings by the SIU. We did not hide our elation when we met them at Scopa, where they presented the findings. This was not the only finding. There are two other important findings that they made. One relating to monies owed by NSFAS by institutions. The other related to possible collusions on the student accommodation front. Now, on this subject of the 5 billion rands, this is not new to us. The Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Blade Zimande, in a press conference last year, talked about this and made an appeal for parents and students not to defraud the organization. So emotional was he at that press conference that he had to abandon his prepared speech and spoke in Zulu. One thing I would like to emphasize, Masiho, it's we're getting concerned that an impression is being created that this problem is ongoing. Now, if you look at the SIU report, there's a very clear period on when did, from 2018 to 2021. So we're not talking about a current the current situation. We're talking about history. We should make that very clear, because if we present it as something that is happening currently, an impression is going to be given to the public that there's a party at NSFAS.
But how did it go unabated for those 3 years?
Well, this is something that happened in the past, and I'm very pleased to announce that it's something that cannot happen now. Well, you cannot always guarantee what fraudsters can do. As you know, fraudsters can even move out of, walk out of the maximum security prison. But we have put some measures that will make it very difficult for this to happen. If I were to illustrate our hypothesis on the cause of the problem was that in the past, an applicant will come to NSFAS and say, I don't have parents, I'm an orphan, I'm adopted by so-and-so, I'm staying with the grandparents, and they will submit affidavits. Now, that cannot happen anymore. Because you have systems to make sure that you check. We've got systems to do that. And I will come to the question of how we deal with affidavits at this point in time. But beyond systems, we are now collaborating with other state institutions. For instance, if an applicant presents an application, we collaborate with Home Affairs, we collaborate with SARS. In some cases, we invoke the services of credit bureaus to see whether they fall within the bracket. There will be situations where an applicant will say, oh no, I have been adopted by so-and-so. In the past, all they will do will be to submit an affidavit and will, in good faith, will continue to process the application. Now, we do not allow that anymore. We go beyond an affidavit. There must be court documents to prove whether someone is adopted or not. So the loops have now been closed, and I will say with no shadow of doubt that the magnitude of the problem that was there in those years is not there anymore. We have even gone a step further to focus much more closely to those beneficiaries who come from SASA, the so-called SASA households.
Yeah.
We've got a system that will confirm that immediately. And in this kind of cases, there's even an approval there and there.
Take me through what happened with NSFAS continuing to pay the fees of pupils who had dropped out. There was also that point that the SIU spoke of in Scopa during the week, that they found that there were also students that NSFAS continued to disperse funds for their fees, but those students had dropped out of varsity.
Yes, that's an auditing problem, and that talks to the communication of systems between NSFAS and the 76 different institutions that we have in the country. We're now working on that. We are on the verge of establishing a system that allows NSFAS to communicate seamlessly with all the institutions. That loophole was there because there was no system that talked to what was happening among the institutions.
Why was there no system?
Well, that is historical. You must remember that NSFAS
historical,
doubled.
but it happened, and 5 billion rand went to people who didn't deserve.
But a good chunk of the 5 billion rands was because of the fact that in the past there were no systems that will detect fraudulent applications. A good chunk of that can be explained by fraudulent applications.
All right. So now you're only now establishing that good relation with the 76 institutions to at least get a report back on every student that you support.
To communicate a little bit better, because
yes.
the system was disjointed in the past. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's an admittance from you that the system was disjointed.
Yes, it was disjointed. That's true. Yeah.
All right. And then, don't you also think, you know, besides, I'll speak to you about the different employees that maybe NSFAS itself is doing internal investigations on, who did, even though historical, did give these loans to, you know, undeserving students. Do you think there's also an issue with the system as a whole because of the 350,000 rand annual threshold and the missing middle? I mean, 350,000 rand annually is not enough for a household. And that's, you know, you're expecting in this economy that there would be parents who'd be able to afford university fees when all they're getting annually is 350,000.
Masego, you're raising a very important point. You know, it's one thing to celebrate the fact that we've got 40,000 students who are involved in fraudulent activities. But it's quite another for us to ask ourselves the reason why. And I must tell you now, when you talk about the 40,000 students, the number may increase. Now, if you look at the definition of this crime in legal terms, it's an intentional deception of an institution for financial gain. So there are those that benefited, there are those that were accomplices. So if you've got 80,000 students who are involved in these fraudulent activities, there could be double the number that are accomplices. So you're talking about 160,000 people involved. It's not a small matter. It calls for that question that you're raising. What is the cause? And the cause could be that the missing middle is an issue here. In other words, your teachers, your nurses, the police cannot afford this. And we have said this over and over again, that this class in our society cannot afford to pay expensive tuition fees. They cannot afford to pay 8,000 rands a month for accommodation. And that's why we're very happy with the finding that the SIU is making on accommodation and for bringing this matter to the fore. So yes, the issue of the missing middle has got to be addressed and dealt. We're very happy that the ministry, through the work of the MTT appointed by the minister, has got a report on this that went to Cabinet, and Cabinet has advised the ministry that broad consultations should be made before a final decision is made. The board of NSFAS was consulted by the DG, Dr. Sishi and his colleagues, and we have made very, very, very substantive and fundamental contributions on how to deal with this issue of the missing men. It's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, it is. Every year we see fees must fall protests that become more and more violent as we go. Just lastly,
But I'm happy just to interrupt you to say we're very pleased that some of the members of our board come from the fees must fall generation.
Okay.
So you'll see the
they'll have their own stories.
Just
very quickly, Mr. Khoza, when it comes to, is there any internal investigation by NSFAS against possible colluding of your own employees with the student accommodation or with the students who are not deserving?
Yes. You must remember that we have got a forensic unit, a very effective forensic unit within the NSFAS. So we investigate all these matters. As a matter of fact, some of the data that the SIU used come from us. Just that our figure was at 34, theirs is at 40, which really makes us very happy that they are really doing that extra. So we investigate this regularly.
All right. Mr. Khoza, thank you very much for coming into studio and explaining to us. He is not saying that it didn't happen. Indeed, it did. He says there was also a lack of proper communication between NSFAS and the different 76 institutions across the country, but they are working on that.